My name is Andrew King. I'm a scientist at D-Wave, and I'm going to be talking to you today about quantum simulation with D-Wave quantum annealing processors. So I'm going to move mostly away from optimization, but not completely. Now, I started at D-Wave in 2013, and a few months later, in early 2014, D-Wave was featured on the cover of Time magazine. And so I had just come out of a career in computer science, not knowing that much about physics, and I walked past a blow-up of this magazine cover every day on my way into work. And it says, "It promises to solve some of humanity's most complex problems, and nobody knows how it actually works." And at the time, I thought, well, I certainly don't know how it works, but I'm interested to learn. But somebody must know. And I've gone back and forth about this question a few times in the last 13 years. And so today I'm going to go through about 5 years of studies over the last 5 years in quantum simulation, and we'll see where we end up on this question. So we've talked about quantum annealing quite a bit. For me, quantum annealing is all about going through a quantum phase transition. And here you have a schematic of quantum annealing. On the right-hand side, or on the left-hand side, sorry, my right, you've got a quantum paramagnet. So you start in a state that is completely dominated by quantum fluctuations, and it's so quantum that the fluctuations wash away all useful information. There's no correlations, and there's no information. And dynamics are very fast. And then over some annealing time that you choose, you guide the system by attenuating the quantum fluctuations. You guide the system through a quantum phase transition into another Hamiltonian. And this Hamiltonian is represented by the parts that are easily programmable, the H's and the J's. And you can do a few things with this Hamiltonian. You can program a few different things into it, a few different families of things. You can program NP-hard optimization problems into it, and that's what Pau just talked about. You can also program exotic states of matter that are supported by quantum fluctuations into it. And so as you go through this quantum phase transition, you get a lot of interesting quantum dynamics. And at large scale, these can be very, very difficult to simulate. If you go slowly enough and you remain in the ground state the entire time, this is called adiabatic quantum computation. Now, as you get close to the quantum phase transition, the adiabatic time, so how slowly do you have to go to remain in the ground state without exciting, it gets longer and longer. It blows up, it diverges. So if you go quickly, you fall out of adiabaticity early, and you end up at the end of the process with short correlation length. So not much correlation length. You get poor solution qualities for optimization problems. But if you go more slowly towards the quantum phase transition, you get closer to it before you drop out of adiabaticity. And in that case, you can get long-range correlations and very good answers to optimization problems. And now there's a very special relationship between the length of the anneal, so the annealing time, and the correlation length in the system. And this is called the Kibble-Zurich mechanism, or the quantum Kibble-Zurich mechanism. And we've studied this in a few different papers from different angles. So the first time we studied it was in a 1D chain. And we always start with a 1D chain if it's not interesting to do a 0D chain, which is just a single qubit. We always start with a 1D chain because these are basically always easy to solve with a classical computer. And so when you start your simulation with a quantum computer, you know what the answer is supposed to be. You can get your feet firmly on the ground, you can understand what's going on, you can fix problems, and you can convince yourself very rigorously that you're getting the right answer. So in 2022, we published a paper on the 1D chain and the quantum Kibble-Zurich mechanism in Nature Physics. And we looked at small systems and large systems. Now, for small systems, you can remain adiabatic fairly easily. And in the middle plot here, we have demonstrated, it's quite small, but we have demonstrated a very good agreement with between the model and the experiment for 8 to 32 qubit systems. And then we go up to 2,000 qubits. And in the large system limit, we're in the Kibble-Zurich picture. In the small system, it's Landau-Zener. Large system, Kibble-Zurich. These are just names to most of you. But the important thing that we saw in the large system was, first of all, we get the right slope in the quantum coherent regime. And secondly, we see the quantum coherent regime. So what does that mean? Well, if you look at this data on the bottom, you can see different colors indicating different temperatures. And what happens when you anneal faster and faster is the thermal environment affects you less and less. And so eventually, you become completely coherent, meaning that it doesn't matter what temperature the thermal environment is. You're too coherent to be affected by it. You're not exchanging information with the environment or energy. Okay, so this is really cool because we were really able to understand what was going on in the boundaries of the coherent regime in the 1D chain, but it's not very interesting for solving hard optimization problems because a 1D chain is not a hard optimization problem by any stretch of the imagination. So to go to a physicist's idea of what a hard optimization problem is, you go to a three-dimensional spin glass. These are NP-hard, and they're characterized by a 3D cubic lattice with random coupling. So in the bonds between your two qubits and your two neighboring qubits, you put a random plus or minus 1, for example. And there you can get incredibly hard problems. And in 2023, in Nature, we published results, again on small systems and large systems, simulating the quantum critical dynamics. Now, quantum critical means that you're just going through that critical point where you hit a quantum phase transition and you get a macroscopic reformation of the structure of the system. So it's critical, it's where all the important stuff happens. So for small systems, again, we can brute force. It's not 1D, but it's small, so we can brute force the quantum dynamics with a laptop. These are only 16 qubits here. And then we went up to 5,000 qubits, or 5,400. And in that situation, we saw Kibble-Zurich scaling, and we compared it to some other classical or quasi-classical, or pseudo-quantum, I like to call it, spin dynamics that have been proposed as models for D-wave processors in the past. And we were able to very unambiguously show that these do not model the quantum dynamics in the D-wave processor. In fact, we developed a theoretical extension to the Kibble-Zurich framework that showed we were getting almost exactly what we would expect out of a quantum phase transition in terms of the dynamics. And we were seeing something that was faster than the classical analogs. So here we have a quantum speedup. As we anneal longer and longer, the energy drops. And this is what Pao was talking about. So as we anneal, as we put more work in to solving this problem, the energy drops, we get closer to the optimal solution, and this happens faster with quantum than it does with classical. So the harder the problem is, the bigger the advantage is. So this is a quantum speedup in optimization problems. It's backed up by theory, and we know kind of in our hearts that it's basically impossible to simulate the quantum dynamics in a 5,000 qubit spin glass. But we didn't prove it rigorously in this paper. So for example, we didn't prove that this statement holds in the parametric regime we were studying. For example, if you anneal too fast, then you get very, very short correlations, as I said. And in that case, there are classical algorithms that can simulate the quantum dynamics. So we needed to really study this in detail and make sure that we were able to claim that we were doing beyond classical computation. So last year in Science, we published a paper exactly on this subject. And we were doing the same thing, basically. We were smashing through a quantum phase transition, and we were looking at the distribution of outputs at the end. And this is a very interesting and hard problem. And some of these questions about the scaling of statistics with respect to these phase transitions are still open to physicists. So we're treading very unknown ground here and solving problems that are impossible to solve with classical computers. So here we studied not one-dimensional, but two-dimensional, three-dimensional, and infinite-dimensional systems. We ran them through quantum simulations using our D-Wave quantum annealing-based processors. And then we compared the QPU output to the leading approaches with classical computers. And the name of the game is get output that is as high quality as the QPU with a classical algorithm. And we found that of all the approaches that we tried, MPS, matrix product state approaches, were the only ones that could match the quality of the QPU. But because we know something about the scaling of entanglement entropy in these systems, we know that we have area law scaling of entanglement, as they call it, and that means we get an explosion of the resources required by MPS. And we can extrapolate this to the largest simulations we could do with a D-Wave processor, and we found that it would take almost 1 million years for some of these simulations on a GPU-based supercomputer, Frontier, which was at the time the fastest supercomputer in the world. Okay, so that's it for annealing. I'm going to go beyond annealing now. So we've shown basic physics, a speed up in optimization, and then quantum computing beyond what you can do with classical computers. Now I'm going to go beyond annealing. And we're going to demonstrate analog digital computation using something called multicolor annealing. So I'm going to do a zero-dimensional system now. And that means we're going to study 1 qubit, and we're going to use 3 qubits to study this system. We're going to use a source to initialize the state. We're going to use a detector to read the state, and then we're going to use our target qubit as a guinea pig. And I'll show you just an example of how this works. This is about as simple as it can get, so at least the animations are nice. So what we have are 3 separate annealing schedules on our 3 separate qubits, and this is why we call it multicolor annealing, because these qubits are different colors, and so we can run them on different annealing schedules. So the source line is pinned with a flux bias, and so when we ramp it up through the quantum phase transition, it is now kind of hard set in a specific state. And what we're going to do is we're going to anneal the target now to the middle of the anneal, and it's going to copy the state from the source. So let's do that. We have a system, and we have a point in the middle of the anneal. This is this yellow line. That's what we want to study. We want to study the dynamics here. So we copy the state from the source to the target, and then we're going to turn off the communication between the source and the target qubit. So we do that by quenching the source back through the quantum phase transition again, poor source qubit, back into the paramagnetic regime where it can't communicate with anything anymore. Okay, and then the target is free to move under the action of this Hamiltonian, and the action is just going to be a precession. So it's going to spin around the axis of the driver Hamiltonian, which is the transverse field. This is the simplest example possible. So we get this target qubit that is precessing around, and we're finally going to detect it by ramping the detector through the quantum phase transition. And as the detector goes through, it grabs the state from the target, and we just look at the detector as a proxy of the target state. So what we did here is we let this target qubit precess for a certain amount of time, t. This is the delay between the source and the detector. If we put this in a gate language, what we're doing is we're applying a pi/2 gate or a Hadamard gate to the target qubit. Then we're applying an analog Hamiltonian for a certain amount of time, or a continuous time Hamiltonian, and it's a fixed Hamiltonian. And then we are doing a measurement using the detector qubit. And what does the data look like in that case? You're looking at basically a projection of something that is rotating around in a circle. It's precessing. So you're going to get something like a sine curve or a cosine curve, depending on the phase of it. And this is just a cartoon, but it gives you an idea of what we would expect to see. Now, we're not going to just look at 1 qubit. We're going to look at 120 qubits doing this in unison. So they're not talking to each other. We're injecting an excitation with the source to the target, and then we're reading them all out. And we want to see these qubits dance together. And so what we see is this oscillation, this coherent oscillation of these qubits, and it's almost perfectly synchronized. These are 120 different copies of the same experiment running at the same time. And this is how well lined up they are. This takes some refinement, but we can do it. And the reason we need to do this refinement is because we need everything perfectly synchronized to see the fine details of the quantum dynamics. And before I talk about that, I just want to mention that we can read out in an arbitrary basis. So normally we read out in what's called the flux basis or the Z basis, and that's what you see here on the left-hand side. In the middle, you've got a rotation halfway to the x-axis, and then on the right, you've got a rotation all the way down to the x-axis. So you're seeing a totally different axis of measurement. So we can really get a nice picture of what's going on within these block spheres, as they're called, of the qubits. Okay. No more 0 dimensions, back to 1 dimension. But we're doing it in a much more interesting way than before. So we're injecting a single source now, and we want to see how this propagates about 120 qubits coupled together in a periodic ring. Okay? And this is something on a personal level that I tried to do for a long time without this multicolor annealing, and it was very difficult to see anything that we would expect to see. And so this is a bit of a vindication because the data looks so good. And I'm going to show it coming in at 1 billion times speed. So this takes 20 seconds. In reality, it takes 20 nanoseconds. And you can see a couple of important features in this data. First of all, you see that this cone is spreading out in a straight line. This is the light cone of information propagating about the chain. And this tells you that you have ballistic dynamics of the excitation within the chain. It's an important characteristic of the quantum dynamics. And then, as I said, this is 120 spins all coupled together in a ring. And so it's almost like you have a circular lazy river and you drop a pebble in it and you watch the wave propagate around. And eventually, it interferes with itself. And that's what you see up at the top and the bottom. And you see this beautiful pattern of interference. And when you run a classical simulation, you see almost the exact same pattern with the qubit parameters. So this is why we need these qubits to dance together in very fine synchronization. So if we want to be a little bit more rigorous, we can look at something called the dispersion relation. This is basically a Fourier transform of the spatial data, and because it's a 1D system, we know exactly what the dispersion relation is supposed to look like in the thermodynamic limit, as they say. And it's supposed to look like this dotted white line. And you can see that underneath this dotted white line is the peak of the data out of the QPU. And you can see that they're in exactly the same place. So this is we're not just getting the velocity or the ballisticness of the propagation, right? We're getting all the dynamical details. So this is extremely nice to see. And this is just the beginning for what we can do with multicolor annealing, because we can then add disorder to the system and look at what's called Anderson localization. We can do it in 2 dimensions and explore what's called many-body localization. There's a lot of stuff we can do. And this has just been made available to select research customers. Hopefully, we're going to be extending this in the near future. So back to the initial question. What do we think? Do we actually know how these work? I, for one, am kind of convinced after all this work that we know what's going on, and I think we can just say it actually works. So just to wrap up, we're opening new horizons with new capabilities in the quantum annealing processors. A few years ago, we started doing fast annealing, which opened up the coherent regime. And with that, we were able to do quantum critical dynamics, demonstrating a really theoretically backed up quantum speed up over classical in optimization. And we were later able to show beyond classical performance in a simulation task for quantum phase transitions. And now finally, the newest data, we can do analog digital computation. So we're excited to see what we can do with it, and we're also excited to see what you can do with it as research customers. Thank you very much for your attention.